In a fairy tale land of witches, warriors, and kings, the crown prince of a nation, Oscar, has traveled to a far-off tower, desperate to break a terrible curse. For he has been cursed with an affliction which will cause any woman who would bear him a child to die in childbirth, taking the child with her. Now, he seeks a way to undo this awful fate and ensure the continuation of his bloodline. Hey everybody, Katallina here, and that is the basic premise of the show we're going to be talking about today, which is Unnamed Memory. I'm really excited to talk about this show because this has a lot of traditional fairy tale tropes and ideas, and it seems to mix them a little bit with certain more modern sensibilities in the way some of the characters were behaving. I think they've done a really good job from what I've seen of this episode, and I look forward to see what they'll be doing from here on out, but let's get into this and have a bit of a discussion, shall we? As I stated in my intro, our story begins with Prince Oscar and his, I think it's going to be a squire, Lazar, traveling to this tower, which is rumored to house the witch Tinasha. I'm going to mess her name up a lot, I'll warn you that now. And they are hoping that she will be able to help them break this curse that has happened to the prince. I think one of the interesting things that happens as we see this episode unfold is that we really get to see this dynamic of a traditional idea and motif in fairy tales, which is of the heroic prince and the cowardly squire. This is something in modern day that probably seems really annoying to a lot of us because, for the most part, in a medieval sense, the majority of us would have been peasants. So this kind of cowardly attribution probably annoys some people. And when we think about modern times and the way that we tend to view people and status in a modern perspective, we often use storytelling in modern times to put forward the idea that people who are overly educated or wealthy or of higher standing tend to be less scrupulous and more evil. So to see a story doing the more traditional inversion of this is rather interesting, and I wonder how people will take it. When I was looking at comments on Crunchyroll after I watched the episode, I noticed that this was something that was coming up a lot, and it kind of made me chuckle because I think we've really gotten away from a lot of ideas that are in traditional myths and lore and fairy tales. So I don't think we're as used to seeing this kind of thing portrayed because you would not normally portray this in modern storytelling because it's something that, since most people would fall under this classification, if we went back in time, it's not going to be broadly popular. But I think given the time and setting of this story, and that they're going, from what it seems, for a very traditional fairy tale feel, I think it really fits here. I hope that we actually see more of Lazar's character. I hope he isn't just constantly always this very cautious and very seemingly cowardly person. But in his defense, I do want to point out the fact that whether we like the idea that most of us would be this or not, the reality is, regardless of social standing or status, in the real world, the majority of us would be Lazar. The majority of us would be the ones going, "My prince, it's too dangerous!" Because most people are not heroes. Heroism is special because it is the exception, not the norm. I think a lot of people forget that. The next thing about this story, which may seem really odd in a modern context, is that this is a story that is talking about the value of tradition and the continuing flow of life from mother and father to child, creating generations. We live in a society where the idea of having children has gone from being something that was a required need to something that is a luxury. From something that was once an asset to something which is often seen as a burden. So to see a story actually tell us about this man who desperately wants to be able to have a child and to continue his family line isn't something that we are actually as encouraged to do today, and is something that a lot of people actually think is unethical or immoral because of environmental concerns. So again, it's very interesting to see this topic coming up the way that it is. I also think that it's really interesting that Tinashe seems to have completely different ideas on this than Oscar does. I think it's funny that she's more concerned about things like the bloodline of the royal family and what bringing her into it would actually imply. Although it's a 50-50 chance as to whether she's just like, no honey, you're not for me, or whether it is actual concern from a social political perspective. Either way though, it's something that I think we don't see nearly as much of in fiction as we used to. I mean, if we look at this from a Western perspective for a moment, the last time that we had a basically straight-laced traditional fairy tale from Disney, and I'm using them because they're usually the standard for this, was 2011's Tangled. We did have Frozen in 2013, but Frozen's main objective was actually to invert those tropes and to make fun of the idea of love at first sight, and to instead add virtues to the concept of familial or sisterly love. So that's something to think about. One place where I feel that the lore kind of is shifting away from tradition and is experimenting with something different is when we actually take a look at what Tinashe's character is like as a witch. Because traditionally, when we think of witches, we think of things like Baba Yaga, or we think of Maleficent, or we think of the evil queen. We think of somebody who is evil and dastardly, cunning and unscrupulous, somebody who will do anything to get what they want, and sometimes who will do awful things just for their own sake of amusement. Meanwhile, in this story, we learn that Tinashe, while she does have these trials to have people be able to prove their worth before they can get a wish granted from her, actually doesn't kill anybody. And if somebody who needs something that's truly good, like someone trying to save their sick child, tries to do this and fails, she'll actually grant the wish even though they didn't succeed, because her objective isn't so much to not help people, but rather to make sure that if somebody wants something that's for their own benefit, that they earn it. So I thought that was interesting, and I thought it was really interesting how they utilized Lazar and his caution and his situation to be able to showcase this to us. It also showed both Oscar's resolve in getting to the top of the tower, because he didn't stop to save Lazar, but we do actually see that there is some grief in him over the fact that something has happened. And I think that Tinashe also recognized this, because one of the first things that she tells him when he gets to the top of the tower is that his friend is not dead. And I thought that was really cool. At the same time though, Tinashe is not a wimp and not a coward. But Oscar is definitely more cunning and shrewd than she is, and I'll explain to you why. When we have this conversation where they are discussing whether or not that she should become his wife and give him a baby, she actually is like, I'm just gonna erase your memories and send you back. And he is like, hell no. He pulls out his sword, which actually can cancel out magic, and they're about to throw down. And it's funny because she's like, that's like some treasure that should usually be in the treasury. And she's not thinking of the fact that Oscar has lived his entire life in a situation where he's been under this horrible curse. Why wouldn't a knight who knows how to use a sword be carrying around a sword that can block magic if he is afraid of the idea that somebody could just come along and do something like that to him again? I actually think that it shows both his competence and probably a great chunk of where it comes from. It's probably something he spent a lot of time studying, but it also shows the effect and the trauma that the situation that he is in is likely put him through, and I thought that was a really clever touch. Yet, while I'll sing Tinashe's praises for not just randomly killing townspeople who come and are desperate to save their kids or something, I will give her shit on another count, and that is in how she tries to deal with this curse that Oscar is under. What I find really annoying about what she did is she's all like, I got this scrying bowl and I'm gonna find you somebody that you can use to be able to continue your bloodline. And he's all like, but what if they're married? Or what if they're elderly? Or what if they're a child? And I mean, she admits that if they're married, that's gonna be a problem. She points out that if somebody is elderly, there's magic that can be done to correct it. But it's when she comes to talking about a child and she's just like, well, find them, raise them, and you can make them your ideal woman. And Oscar, you can just see the reaction. He looks like he wants to throw up, and I don't blame him. But what's really funny is how he turns it around on her a couple minutes later, and he's just like, you can be my wife. And she's just like, no. It's really funny because, like, I don't know, as I've said earlier, whether it's because of political stuff, whether there's something about her that he doesn't know, or whether she's just plain not interested. But if it's the last of those three, she's a damned hypocrite, because she's sitting there and trying to make it seem like some other chickie can just shut up and, like, do her duty to the crown. But when it's her, oh, no, 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 no. And she's just, like, totally against it. And it's like, well, too bad for you, sweet pea. You're the perfect candidate. And I mean, it's funny because, like, on one hand we have these values of tradition shown generally through Oscar, but then Tanisha, who seems very rational and very calm and very compassionate, the moment that her own independence is in any way put into question, she's just like, walls up! And that's that, baby. And that's when they actually get into this whole conflict. And eventually they agree on her coming to stay at the castle for a year. But, like, I just couldn't believe how much of a freaking hypocrite she was. Because, I mean, I can understand her side and her angle, but it's the side and angle that every woman throughout history who has ever been forced into something for social and political reasons rather than because they want to be with someone has experienced. So, given that she is in a medieval setting, what makes her think for one hot second that she should be excluded from that? That's hilarious. Lastly, I just want to touch on the fact that Oscar, who is, like, as stubborn as a brick wall, totally wants to change her mind. And something that's come up in their conversation, and I keep thinking about it, and he doesn't seem to be bothered by it in the slightest, is the idea that apparently 70 years ago, his grandpa climbed this tower, and his grandpa basically had the same idea in mind. Hey baby, wanna get married? And it's like, wait a second here, bro. Because she actually makes the joke that had she been somebody who would do this in the past, she would have been his grandmother. I'm thinking, oh my god, that is so weird. Like, I mean, how would you deal with that? How would you think about that? Like, that's just awkward as hell. But I guess that it's probably going to be something referenced here and there to make a touch of humor, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with it because nothing actually happened. It was just that the former king back in the day had sort of a crush on her or something, and, like, that's hilarious. And apparently she stayed at the castle where they're going now in the story for 6 months, doing gardening and teaching students and stuff back then. And it'll be interesting to see, like, was there some kind of history between the two of them back in the past? Does that have something to do with her hesitation now? Is there some underlying force that we don't know about? I mean, we're only on episode 1, so there are obviously a lot of blanks that we haven't filled in. And it's going to be interesting to see just what is going on, because when we look at what's going on in the trailer, we see that there are forces at work that we don't know about yet. And there's definitely going to be stuff that these characters are going to be dealing with going forward. At any rate, it's going to be fun seeing these two get to know each other, seeing what challenges they will face, seeing whether they actually end up liking each other or whether she'll just wait until he's sleeping and turn him into a frog. But I think this is going to be a really fun one to watch, especially because of the underlying fairy tale themes, which was what drew me to it in the first place. I've had a really good time talking about episode 1. I had a lot of fun watching it, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!